14 to 20 days. But if the rails were working, in 8 hours you're in Lagos. Yeah. Because at 120 kilometers or 150 kilometers per hour for 800 kilometers, just tell me how many hours it takes you to get to Lagos. So the president now says, look, we are going to change what we are doing. It's no longer roads alone. We'll combine both roads and rail. So we must, because we didn't meet enough money. They shouldn't forget that we didn't just see money. If we saw that money that Obasanjo saw in his time, maybe things would have changed in terms of rail construction. So the man says, let's deal with this 1,300 to 1,500 kilometers of rail from Lagos to Kano, because you have 30 million tons of cargo on that track. If we deal with that, we would have been able to ease off this road. So where are we? I said, sir, on my table is an application for loan by the same government to Chinese government, China Exim Bank. If you permit us, we can pursue the loan through Ministry of Finance. So Ministry of Finance now engages China Exim Bank to say, there's a loan that was already in request by the previous government. We are interested to further it. And the government says, look, to give people this huge amount of money, $8.7 billion won't be easy. So we can give you the first set of 1.6 to construct Lagos to Ibadan. In fact, they were to give us Lagos to Ibadan and Kano to Kaduna at the same time. But they gave us Lagos to Ibadan first, and now they are proceeding to give us Kano to Kaduna, Kaduna to Abuja, then Abuja to Lagos. Are they telling us not to take the loan? Then, why I specifically said, please be careful to the National Assembly. Please be careful of what this probe on the loan agreement. It's because we just recently were trying to make an application for the Port Harcourt Maiduguri rail. If nothing else is happening, you know that our brothers are saying, oh, we don't want to do the southeast. We don't want to do anything in the southeast. We want to do anything in the north. Now that we are applying to say, give us some loans so that we can construct the Lagos to Port Harcourt to Maiduguri. By the way, a month or two ago, the National Assembly had warned the Minister of Finance not to come back here for a borrowing plan without including the Port Harcourt to Maiduguri. So the ministry is doing everything. The president has given approval. We're about to go to cabinet for approval. And then you're shouting, oh, these terms are bad. These Chinese people are wicked people. How would they give you the money?
You actually said that they might not give the money.
Exactly.
The National Assembly.
Exactly. And I have documents to that effect where people are, we're getting signals that they become a bit apprehensive about, are we doing this because we don't want to pay them back? So if we're a lender, will you continue to lend when the borrower is saying, no, these terms are bad?
Well, it turns out that as we're having this conversation this morning, there's no member of the House of Reps to respond to this. But it's a pertinent question to raise as to the capacity for understanding these concepts and the larger issues that have been raised. I don't know. Let me put the issue on the table. Why? I mean, it seemed as if there was no clarification, or nobody in the committee sought to say, look, maybe they just speak to that you are waiving sovereignty without breaking it down, and so on and so forth. Let's bring in again the Attorney General of the Federation. Attorney General, you listened to Professor Uche Waleke give the experience at the state level when the state, of course, is seeking a facility domestically. Of course, to get into external borrowing, they will have to go through the approval process of the DMO. Now, for loans and facilities being obtained by the federal government, what is the procedure?
Well, the conventional procedure, if not perhaps limited breaches that set into the system on account of certain procedural immunities relating to previous administration. A case in point is the case of fee and ID. And that eventually resulted in prosecution arising from the procedural breaches associated with the contractual agreement giving rise to fee and ID case. But the conventional practice, one, is to ensure at the end of the day that any agreement that is conceived is passed through the office of the Attorney General of the Federation for vetting. But I think the point of interest relating thereto is the fact that before even a draft copy of the agreement is processed, there is a procedural precedent that all associated approvals, permits associated with a loan facility are complied with. If you are talking of the National Assembly, there has to be an approval of the National Assembly for the loan facility to be acquired. And then at the end of the day, when eventually that approval is secured from the National Assembly, the other bureaucratic processes of putting of a draft agreement with the parties participating is now carried out. And then the draft agreement as processed is passed on to the Office of the Attorney General for the purpose of vetting same to ensure that the national interest element is effectively factored and accommodated in the draft agreement. When eventually the agreement is vetted, it is now processed back to the affected ministry, which now has a further responsibility to present same before Federal Executive Council for consideration and deliberation by the council members, where opinions are entertained, and then eventually, if the council finds the content, spirit, and terms of the agreement acceptable, the council now approves the agreement, and then the relevant ministries, departments, and agencies are given the go-ahead to facilitate same. So what I'm saying in essence, it is a multi-sectoral, multi-organs arrangement that allows cross-fertilization of not only ideas, but cross-fertilization of consensus building and agreement, all targeted at ensuring at the end of the day that the interest of the nation is adequately protected. If for any reason whatsoever, at the end of the day, there are certain breaches that set into the process, perhaps maybe overlooking the relevance of the Office of the Attorney General, for example, in providing the desired technical support to the input in the agreement, it usually translates to criminal prosecution, as what obtains relating to the fee and ID, where the procedure was apparently shortchanged, taking into consideration that necessary permits that constitute the foundation for engagement into such agreement were overlooked, necessary vetting by the Office of the Attorney General was overlooked, necessary approval of the Federal Executive Council was equally overlooked, and it eventually translated to a criminal prosecution of the parties involved. So the procedure is indeed a multi-sectoral, multi-organs of government, in the sense that the National Assembly has a role to play in giving an approval for the loan. The executive has a role to play in ensuring that the vetting is done by the Office of the Attorney General. The Federal Executive Council is carried along for the purpose of deliberating on the agreement and indeed approving same where it finds it reasonable and acceptable to have it approved.
Okay, Honorable Minister, Mr. Professor Uche Owaleke spoke about collaterals and, renegotiating terms of agreement. Will that be possible?
You see, we have passed the stage of renegotiating or reconsidering, because whatever you have to do as a nation in terms of international engagement, you ought to have done same at the point of allowing for these processes, at the point of the National Assembly looking into the request for loan and approving same, at the point of the Office of the Attorney General betting the agreement and ensuring that the national interest is factored, at the point of the Federal Executive Council giving an approval to the draft MOU, and indeed at the point of international negotiations to ensure at the end of the day that the interest, the Nigerian interest as factored into the agreement, is indeed negotiated at the international level before parties eventually signs the agreement. So you cannot be approbating and at the same time reprobating, conducting the necessary procedures associated with your country, the other country processing SEM in line with the necessary procedures. And in exceptional circumstances, you are even expected to ratify SEM by an instrument of ratification duly signed by the respective countries. And then after ratifying SEM, in line with the international best practices, and then you are now coming back to say, no, we are mistaken, we are wrong. We ought not to have given approval for the facility to be obtained or acquired, and so we want to renegotiate. Renegotiate what? So the option that is apparently visible and logical that will save your face as a nation, having undergone the processes up to the point of ratification, is perhaps to revoke and rescind the contract. Even at that, revocation and rescission of SEM will certainly attract liability because the breach factor must naturally set in, and the other country that has been subjected to these associated rigors will naturally be exposed to certain liabilities, and that will entitle them as a matter of right to claim for damages. The clause that has been read by Honorable Minister of Transportation is a deliberate attempt to accord protection. So the idea of arbitration in the event of breach has set into that clause. The idea of attachment or perhaps concession on the attachment of commercial asset of a nation has been factored into it. So at the end of the day, if by any stretch of imagination, as a nation at this point and hour, we decide to revoke or rescind the contract, that will now kickstart the relevant clause of the agreement by way of arbitration, and then Nigeria cannot claim diplomatic immunity and refuse to submit to international arbitration when the clause is eventually factored, and then the element of liability by way of subjecting China to unnecessary trouble, to unnecessary expenditure associated with facilitation and processing of the loan agreement will equally factor in, and then Nigeria will be exposed to a liability when in fact no value has been added and obtained arising from the conduct of perhaps the National Assembly that insists on revocation or rescission at this hour. It is indeed not about surrender of immunity, but indeed about providing guarantee and comfort for a commercial loan facility.
So no retreat, no surrender.
No retreat, no surrender.
Forgive me. Let me continue to read the end of the clause so I can see. No, the same clause they're talking about.
Yeah.
The clause says, while a borrower would have to borrow on lender's terms to ensure repayment, it must be within the confines of international best practices. What else are you looking for? The people say, we will not do anything that is outside what other parts of the world, other countries do.
I don't know. You're probably not the best person to ask this.
No,
I know Professor Waleke wants to say something. I just want to. What was the motivation for this whole investigation? What was the trigger so that we can have?
That's why you need to bring in the National Assembly, because believe me, I respect the National Assembly.
They were invited actually, but for one reason or another, they couldn't come. Both the Senate committee and the House of Reps.
Okay, so that's because actually I sat in my office
beyond their control,
and I got a letter saying, Minister of Transport, appear before the Committee on Treaties and come and discuss loan agreement. It would be wrong for me to say, dear Honorable House, I can't appear because I don't have anything to do with loan. No. I have to respect the National Assembly, and I appeared before them. And I was surprised, believe me. That's why I won. It's unnecessary, because what you'll be doing is you're exposing the National Assembly before the country to say that they were not aware of this clause when they actually approved the loan. Why approve a loan that you're not aware of?
All right, Professor Waleke, you wanted to say something?
Yes. First, let me start by reiterating what I said earlier, that relative to other loans you've taken, Chinese loans are largely concessional. Whether you're looking at the interest rate or you're looking at even the tenor, they are concessional. I just wanted to react to the issue of renegotiation. When I talked about renegotiation, I was actually referring to taking advantage of the COVID-19 era. Okay. Of course, I had said it before that we can't afford to say we are repudiating the debt or we are revoking. Okay, but we can, because I'm aware that China is in agreement with major creditor countries, okay, to offer debt relief to debtor countries because of COVID-19, whether we shouldn't explore that option. But by and large, if you look at section 21 of the Debt Management Office Act 2003, that talks about National Assembly must approve any external loan we are taking. You also marry that with section 41 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007 that says such loans must be exclusive for capital projects or human development. If you look at those clauses in those two acts, the Chinese loans, meet those conditions. So all I'm saying is that we can take advantage of COVID-19 to renegotiate. And talking about the National Assembly, one may not be surprised because what we have now is the Ninth Assembly. The people that the group that must have approved the loans, taking resolutions on the loans, were previous assembly. So these ones are new, and that's the more reason they will need more information with respect to these loans. And that's why I've always advocated, between the DMO, the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, and the Office of the Auditor General of the Federation, there should be a regular report to the National Assembly through the Public Accounts Committee on the status of our loans, because it's already assuming, very, large proportion.
All right, Professor Waleke, thank you very much. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're taking a short break now. When we return from the break, we'll take viewers' reactions and then continue with the conversation with our guests.
Okay.
All right, we have to skip that break now. In the meantime, we have some technical glitches there. So let's just take the twist, Jumain, straight away. Onwongogo Sivana says, we sing the song of borrowing with pleasure as if it's a blessed norm. Can the government defend what they achieved with the previous borrowings, showing physical and material evidence as proof of prudent economic management? Don't forget, borrowing enslaves. Well, Onwongogo, if you've been listening to this conversation, the Honorable Minister of Transportation has given you an example.
Yes.
So the loan that was obtained for the construction of the Abuja-Kaduna rail line did about 80% of the job, and the incumbent administration deployed 20% from the regular budgetary cycle to finish up the job. So you're looking for further evidence?
Well, let's move on now. Chris Simon tweets, it's not about borrowing, but it's the judicious use of the money that matters. All these years, Nigeria has been borrowing and we're still having decayed infrastructure and infrastructure's deficit. Then why borrowing every year?
This is from Dele Jack Solomon. Signing loan agreements with a clause that waives the sovereign immunity of the country if it defaults in its repayment plan has negative implications on the sovereignty and economic development of Nigeria. It's high time we learned to judiciously use what we have to get what we need. Well, again, Dele Jack Solomon, one of our regulars, I hope you listened to the detailed explanation provided by the Attorney General of the Federation with regard to the distinction, he said, between the sovereign immunity of a country, and that's the territorial immunity, jurisdictional immunity, as well as commercial immunity. This relates to a commercial transaction, and it doesn't affect our sovereignty as an entity.
Yes, and Titus Monday Knock tweets, should we continue to borrow so that our future generations would be the ones to pay? A debtor is always a slave to the creditor until the day he remits his debts. In our case, most of the people collecting these debts would have been out of power. Let's make do with what we have.
This is coming from Mike Ayakwa. So loans are essential ingredients in refloating economies. Interest are cost of loans, payable, and the reward for parting with liquidity. Nigeria is not the only country that borrows. Even developed countries do. But when doing so, the terms must not be ambiguous. There must be a moratorium and a total package of the facility. Interest rates also should be flexible so that they can be renegotiated depending on the realities on the ground.
And Omobola Babs tweets, Nigeria and theatrics. How is it possible that Nigeria will sign an agreement that will cede her sovereignty to another country here? China beats my imagination. Whoever conceives such noxious narrative doesn't mean well for us. Everything isn't politics. Our sovereignty is intact. Getting a loan for development is not an issue. Even advanced economies do it for critical infrastructural development. What is important is that such loans are expended on purposes for which they are borrowed. And exactly the Minister of Transport said 80% has gone and 20% is coming in.
Festus Akimboyewa says politicians should stop confusing us about the sovereignty clause in our borrowing agreements, now which is a standard requirement. The sovereignty clause in these agreements does not mean that a creditor country can occupy Nigeria if we go into default. It just means that we cannot decide not to pay our creditors simply because we are a sovereign entity.
And Law Alpha C tweets, I was opposed to stupendous and homogeneous borrowing by the federal government until I saw the need to tackle infrastructure. But the terms for repayment have to be well defined in order to protect the interests of the nation state, even after this government.
Now, Yunusa Idris, no distractions. Government should go ahead and borrow more. We are witnessing infrastructural development in transportation and the road sector. But I'm calling for the involvement of quantity surveyors in estimating and billing of heavy engineering projects such as railways, roads, and harbors.
And pharmacist Umar tweets, the borrowing is very okay as far as we continue to see development projects carried out by the current government. However, there must be high level of sincerity, integrity, honesty, dedication, and sacrifice to achieve the intended goals. Kudos to President Buhari.
Ayola Adeni tweets, borrowing is good for infrastructure, but utilization of such facilities is equally important. Some previous loans were not properly utilized.
Mutana Farouk tweets, there are always terms and conditions when it comes to lending and borrowing. It is meritorious to borrow to fix the capital projects, but it is disastrous to borrow to service individuals by buying cars, renovations, jumbo salaries and allowances. Corruption retards development.
Nandom Buyep, Honorable Minister, with all the natural resources we are blessed with, I think a bigger brother like Nigeria should be the one lending to other nations. Is it impossible? Let us not remain like the one who is standing by the river, yet crying and dying of thirst.
That's why our gentlemen here in the studio will have time to respond to the tweets, but we take a break now. When we return, the conversation continues.
As a strong immune system increases the chances of victims surviving COVID-19, a corruption-free society creates opportunities for citizens to thrive and prosper. Build your immunity. Stop corruption now. Report all acts of corruption to ICPC on this toll-free number 0800 22 55 4272. This message is brought to you by ICPC and NTA.
In today's world, it's tough being a woman. But thanks to So Clean, Nigeria's #1 detergent with stain magnet technology, doing washing is a whole lot faster and smarter too. Only So Clean has stain magnet technology with an advanced enzyme formula that pulls out even the toughest trapped dirt, just like powerful magnets. No wonder Nigerians love So Clean. So Clean, for a faster, brighter, cleaner wash.
We have observed the lockdown. We have practiced the measures in order to curb the spread of the virus, but we can do better. The coronavirus spread is increasing daily, and only together can we cut down the numbers and defeat the spread of the virus. Remember, COVID-19 is not a death sentence, and a recovered patient cannot spread the disease. Do not stigmatize. Do not hesitate to report any case, or if you have come in contact with anybody that has been infected with COVID-19. If you have cough and fever, please stay at home and call your state hotline. Find state numbers at www.covid19.ncdc.gov.ng. Remember, it is for your own good and for the good of every Nigerian. Let us do better and defeat the virus. Together, we can do this. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
All right, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria, still on the network service of the NTA. Professor Uche Waleke, that's a point that we need to also clarify. I mean, we talked about all the issues relating to borrowing, why we need to borrow. But we do know that if you borrow and there is a repayment clause, you must repay. Now, there have been instances, even in the recent years, where countries, sovereign entities, have defaulted in the repayment of their facilities. Iceland was one about a decade or so ago, and until recently, Greece was also in that bind. So what happens when a sovereign entity defaults in the repayment of its many facilities?
Yes, that speaks to the terms and conditions, of the loan. A good example is the one we are discussing, that in the event of default, the assets that are being constructed, the projects that are being constructed with the loan, will be taken over. So that is one consequence. But for me again, the good thing about Chinese loans, unlike other loans, is that they also have room to accommodate other means of repayment. Okay, for China, you must not repay with cash. Based on what I've read, there are countries that are using their resources to repay, although that also has its limitations. Angola, for example, China has the greatest exposure in Africa, to Angola. Angola has taken over $40-something billion from China. Okay, in our own case, we are talking about just $3.1 billion. For Angola, it's over $40-something billion, and it got to a point Angola started repaying with the oil. So it became a case of a loan for oil agreement. So I think we are not yet at risk of default with respect to Chinese loans. Again, given the size and the terms, I've said the ones you can find on the DMO website for 20 years, 7 years moratorium. I don't think Nigeria is still at risk with respect to that. So, but I also think that going forward, okay, we may also need to explore those other options, particularly given the huge amount we budget every year for debt service. In 2020 budget, for example, we are allocating 2.9 trillion for debt service. And of course, the bulk of that is not for external. The bulk of debt service in Nigeria today is to service domestic debt, which constitutes about 65%, of our debt. So with respect to external debt, I think the country is not yet, at risk. That's my take for that.
I was just wondering, Juma, I mean, interestingly, two of the cabinet members are here with us as our guests. Shouldn't, once you already have the agreement, and the agreement is already been implemented, shouldn't the greater challenge then be to say, look, how do we adhere to the terms of the facility? What are the likely obstacles that could frustrate the implementation of the rail project? Therefore, if, assuming we want to do oversight, we say, look, that is our chief concern, to say, look, let us be sure that this project is executed and that it's able to repay itself within a 20-year limit guaranteed for this, rather than seeking to say, okay, what is this term saying now? This thing is sovereign, the other one is waiving, and so on and so forth. Isn't that a challenge that that ordinarily should engage us? To say, once you have signed an agreement, you are bound by it, and that you have an obligation to perform.
Well, I think the essence of oversight function vested in the National Assembly is to ensure compliance. A loan has been approved, facility obtained, is meant for a particular project. The project is executed and repayment plans are in place. So the oversight function is to ensure compliances with identified milestones as far as, one, the application of the loan is concerned, and two, the repayment options are concerned. The idea of a kind of turning the wheel back by way of revocation, rescission is out of it, because the necessary approvals, necessary concessions were already looked into, analyzed, and eventually given by the National Assembly. So the National Assembly should not be seen as appropriating, giving an approval for the facility, and then reprobating by way of insisting that we should revoke what has been approved. But the bottom line, if we are to do justice to the constitutional role expected of a National Assembly, is to look at the components relating to the processes, the procedure, and in case of loan facilities, referment of same as to whether justice is done to these processes in compliance, and not necessarily to undermine the process halfway, even when it was ab initio approved by the National Assembly.
Honorable Minister, what has been your experience in terms of getting the support by way of oversight to say, look, we're actually crunching the numbers? Attorney General makes a valid point that the oversight should relate to milestones. You have a 20-year window to repay this facility on account of this project. Where are you now? What is likely to impede you? How do we leapfrog whatever impediments they are likely to be, rather than just, you know, the typical show of see the TV cameras and everybody goes back home?
Okay, first is, look, there are two types of oversight I will address on this. When it comes to the loan and the repayment of the loan, I'm not in a position to discuss that because that happens with Ministry of Finance. But to assist Ministry of Finance, what we did was to go to Cabinet to get approval for the Nigerian Railway Corporation to open an account, an escrow account, so that whatever is in excess of running costs that we have, we pay into that account that could assist in repayment. But don't forget, so far, it's Kaduna, so not much in terms of cargo. But in terms of passengers, we run at 90 million, but certainly not up to 100 million in a month. And then we now get 120 as income. So that excess of 30 million is what we want to put in an escrow account that will assist Ministry of Finance to begin to repay back as our own contribution. That's as it pertains to the issue of repayment. But I just told you here that what came out of that committee sitting was that DMO confirmed that they have been able to pay back $90 million out of the $500 million. Indeed, let me tell you what the cabinet did and the president did. The former Minister for Finance, we went to cabinet to say, look, we want a loan of $500 million, and the Chinese have agreed to give us a loan of $500 million to buy rolling stocks, which is coaches, locomotives, and all that. And she said, no, Nigeria can afford $500 million. So I don't support the borrowing of $500 million to buy rolling stock. And the president agreed. And today we are paying for the rolling stock from budgetary provision. And we have got more than 60-70% of the money. Probably, if President Buhari was the president at that time, probably he would not have borrowed the $500 million because probably he would have relied on budgetary provision. The reason why we are borrowing for Lagos Ibadan is that is $1.6 billion. That's quite a huge amount of money. So what, therefore, our contribution is just to ensure that as we are running, whatever is in the excess of the running costs is paid back to Ministry of Finance to assist them in repayment. That's at it. When it comes to construction, I have good relationship with the committee on land transport that supervises or performs oversight function as far as railway is concerned. And there's no time we've gone with them to the site that they have not confirmed that not only are we meeting timelines, they are impressed with the activities. There are two ways we have approached it. We must also give credit to President Goodluck Jonathan's government because they brought in an Italian firm, team, which is European, to supervise a Chinese company which constructs. The implication, therefore, is that you must meet the European standards. So you don't see our railways not. And I'll give you an example in terms of communication. When we looked at the communication and signaling, the equipment they supplied they're not below standard. What they were lower standard than what we should ordinarily be asking for. So when we came, we talked with the European company, and we talked with the Chinese company and said, okay, you up the standard to that level of the European. That's where we are. So we now have an upgraded standard for communication and signaling, which enables us to even use one track instead of double track. Because once you have good communication and good signaling, all you do is when a rail is coming and you are in Kaduna, you say, oh, wait, when I pass, you can continue. And that's what happens instead of double track. So basically, National Assembly oversights us, And they've been doing a good job, because when they are coming, everybody, you see the MD is rushing to do that, the minister is rushing to go and meet them wherever. There's no big man in it, because they have to approve your budget. They have to approve your budget, and they really have to know how you're using the money that they have approved. That they have done well, and I think that relationship is good.
You'll be going back to the National Assembly on the 18th to address them and give them details on how you've been managing the transport sector. What do you think this discussion or conversation will center on?
No, I wouldn't know. Because I wouldn't know is that it certainly cannot be on the loan, because I don't take a loan. Well, as far as the Minister of Transport is concerned, if it is loan, then they need to address Minister of Finance. Okay. But what the chairman did say that day when I said, well, I'm not here to answer any question on loan because I don't take loan, was that, okay, and I said, what I do is that I implement the loan. And what I have done is to implement what I have been given. Okay. We have completed Kaduna, Abuja, and everybody will say how much contribution it has made to the growth of the Kaduna economy and the Abuja economy, the number of jobs it has created. In fact, the cost of land now, the land you would have bought at 150 around that area is going for 1 million naira. Yes. That is economic growth. I'm not an economist, so I'm sure I'm just talking as a layman. Then go to Lagos Ibadan. They've sold all the land on that distance. We have put 2 infrastructure there. We have put and that's why when people attack the Chinese, I just really wonder why they are being fair to these guys. We're talking with the Chinese without putting $1. They are constructing a factory at Kajola to produce locally locomotives, coaches, and wagons. What else are you asking for? The same way they have agreed that once they start constructing Port Harcourt to Maiduguri, they are going to build a seaport at Bonny, and they will build a new industrial in Port Harcourt. What else are we looking for? All by the side,
not part of the agreement.
Well, there are different agreements from the main agreement of the contract, but there are agreements.
Honourable Minister, thank you very much. Attorney General of the Federation, I would like this to form part of your closing thoughts. Ordinarily, it's a fairly straightforward question. What is the language of an agreement to be signed by 2 parties in the event that the 2 entities are of different nationalities and therefore different languages?
The language of an agreement with international collaboration is building consensus. And there is no standard language that is of universal application. But it is about how hard you negotiate as a nation for the purpose of affording protection to your sovereignty and to your commercial interest. If, for example, country A may concede to handing over the facility put in place arising from the loan, country B may not necessarily wholeheartedly agree to that arrangement. It's indeed a function of negotiations, a function of concessions, a function of compromises, all geared towards getting the maximum benefit, maximum understanding, and maximum concessions that will be beneficial to our interest as a nation. But then the bottom line is it is about compromises, it is about building consensus, and it is about building understanding that is mutually beneficial to the parties of interest.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your input and insight into the topic. Thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria. Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami-san, it's been a pleasure having you as always. And Minister of Transportation, Right Honorable Rotimi Amechi, thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria. Professor Uche Waleke, Chairman, Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria and former Commissioner of Finance, Imo State, thank you so much for your input. And that's Good Morning Nigeria for today. Thank you so much for watching. I am Jumwa Yusuf.
And I'm Kingsley Osadola, asking you to take responsibility, stay safe and be well. See you tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning.